Hello everyone, in my interactive art and design class this semester. Today, very first intro to Dreamweaver. Um, we're going to start with some terms and do a very short look at all the different windows and the interface and how you sort of want to set things up, because this is super important. I cannot emphasize how important this short lesson is, because we're going to be setting up I'm going to switch to this tab here. We're going to be setting up the local site folder. This is where all your files will reside for your website. So you'll have a site folder for each website that you create, and I'm going to recommend today that you make a site folder for all your assignments, because we're going to have weekly assignments that you will need to complete and turn in, since we're doing all this virtually. We'll talk about the tabs you need to leave open for the optimal workspace, and we will also talk about file naming conventions for the web, because they're very specific. Your website is basically a folder that has all your HTML, JPEG, GIF, image files in it, everything that your browser will need. When you see an image in a browser like Chrome or Safari, that image has not actually been placed on a page. It's actually a link to that image, and that image will reside in something called the local site folder. So it's super important to be organized. Very important. So I would go ahead and make notes, pause this right here, make notes about the things you're going to talk about, especially your file naming conventions, which I will mention quite a few times. Okay, so Dreamweaver. Let's go ahead and launch Dreamweaver. But before we do, there's an important setup thing we're going to have to do. I'm going to have to minimize this Photoshop screen so you can see my desktop for a minute. So on my desktop, the first thing I'm going to do is make a new folder. So file, new folder. And I'm going to call this will be I'll call it assignments. It'll be my site folder for all my assignments, for my weekly assignments. I could make separate site folders for each assignment, but I think it'll just be easier to make one. And then you'll have a site folder for every project. So for the 3 major projects, you'll have a site folder, a local root folder for each one of those. Those terms are used interchangeably. Local site folder, local root folder. Okay, so there's assignments. I'm going to put it right here at the top so we can all see that. There's nothing in it right now. It is empty. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that and make it a little smaller. Okay, we're going to launch Dreamweaver now. And we'll start adding a few files and content to our website, but not very much today, because it's just I'm trying to keep this quick and emphasize just a really, really important thing. So Dreamweaver I have down here in my dock. I'm going to go ahead and launch. The Dreamweaver, if you have Dreamweaver 2020, it's the same. HTML has been basically the same for a long time, but they've added different tags to it, different elements. Okay, so first of all, because I've opened Dreamweaver before, it might open up slightly different for you. It might ask you if you want a standard view or a developer view. I'm in the standard view. Pick standard. In fact, I'm even going to do reset standard, so it'll look like what you'll probably get when you first open up your standard site. Now, first of all, look at this files browser is super important, because your directory of files is really critical to everything working correctly. So if you see your computer here, you know you're not really ready to start. You don't want to see a computer or all the files for everything and every project and every class that you have and everything on your desktop. You should only see your local root folder or your local site folder. I haven't set that up yet, so we don't see it. Let's just go ahead and do that after we close some things. See this DOM folder down here and these other assets and snippets things? We're just going to go ahead and close that tab group. I'm also going to go to my CAC libraries. I'm going to close that tab. So all I have open are my files, my insert, which is where I'll insert things onto a page, and my CSS Designer, because a big part of this semester will be creating styles, cascading style sheets, and styles, which are just rules that tell things how to look. So you say, okay, I have this header that I want a blue background, so you make a style for it that says background is blue. All right, that's all a style is. It's just a rule to tell something how to behave. All right, and we'll talk a lot about the difference between CSS and HTML and what each one of them does. But in general, talk about that in general today. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is set up our local site folder, our local root folder. So to do that, there's a site menu, and it should be over here at the beginning, but it's here. So Dreamweaver, when it opens up, might ask you to set up a site, and you'll get basically you'll get the same window. It'll look like this: site setup. And what we'll do, we'll say, okay, I want to call this site assignments. And this is a site name, not a file name, so I can use a capital letter. That you probably noticed when I make files, I need to use lowercase, or it's best to use lowercase and no spaces. But this is not a file name. This is just the site name. I'm going to call this assignments for fall 2020. And more importantly, I got to click on this little folder, and I have to tell it where the site folder is. So on my desktop, I have my assignments, and I can say choose. If I forgot to do that, it would not be a problem, because anytime you click on a folder, there's always an option to add a new folder down here. So it's not a big deal. I just choose to make it first. You can see that I had a folder on my desktop. All right, now I'm going to click Save. And now you'll see in my site window, if I go to Manage Sites now, there's my assignments for fall 2020. And I've cleared I normally have like 50 different websites in here. I cleared them all with this little minus button so that you wouldn't get confused. All right, so we can work together. But normally you'd see all the different websites that you've worked on in here. And this was how you would click on it, the site that you want to work on. So if I have Amazon's my client, and I have an Amazon website, I could click on the Amazon website, and it would just load up here in my files browser just the files in that site folder for Amazon. In this case, I don't have any files yet, but let me go ahead and stick a file in there. I'm going to run back to my Photoshop document here, and we'll just go ahead and save this as a JPEG. So I'll do File Save As if we want to use it in our website. So on my desktop, there's my assignments folder. I'm going to call it terms-1, and it can't be a PSD because you can't use a PSD document on a website, so we'll make it a JPEG. All right, and it has an embedded color profile that's sRGB, which is perfect. Okay. For all display devices, you want sRGB basically. Okay, and we can talk about how you set that up later. Photoshop doesn't default to that. All right, so terms-1.jpg, all lowercase, no spaces, no special characters. The hyphen does not count as a special character. One period before the extension, and it will always have to have an extension like .html or .jpeg or .gif or GIF. All right, so we're going to save that in our assignments folder. Pick a medium kind of file size. And then if I jump back to Dreamweaver, and if I give it a second, it'll refresh. If it doesn't refresh right away, I can click this little button here. That's the little refresh button, but in general, a lot of times it recognizes that we've added stuff to our local root folder, our local site folder. So I have that image there so I can use it. Until I put it in this, I should not ever place it on a page, because if it's something outside my local root folder, and then I load my local root folder up to publish it, it's going to be missing those files, and they won't display. Okay, so everything goes in here that I'm going to actually put onto the page, into this local root folder. Okay, we need a web page. This is not the web page. I know you're going to want to hit this Create New button right here, or go to File New, but for now, don't do that. You're going to have to learn some basic habits for the web and for Dreamweaver, just to make it actually easier on yourself. Later on, we'll go ahead and use this once we're clear that you need to save things right away. I can do File New and save my document right away before I start to modify it. But as designers, you get carried away because you want to design, right? And so sometimes you forget the little important things like saving it. And that's not a problem in Photoshop or Illustrator, but it is a problem with Dreamweaver because this file we're working on is going to basically be a collection of links to other documents and images. And if it doesn't know where your main file resides on your hard drive, it doesn't know how to link to those files. So it needs to be a saved document. So what I would recommend doing is just going over here to your folder, and then with this little hamburger menu up here, click on it and just say File, New File. It'll default to an HTML file, and I can call this, I'm going to call this index. That will be my first page. So your home page for every site is always called index.html because that loads automatically. When you publish your website, you won't have to tell people to go to uncc.edu/index.html because the web server software will automatically look for that index. All right, so I don't have to write that in my URL when I distribute it. Okay, so again, I just clicked on the little hamburger. Notice I had this grayed out. Like if I have a terms, my JPEG selected, and I go to File, oh, it just will let me do a new file from there. As long as I'm clicking on something in here now, it'll let me do a new file. Okay, so that's what I did. So let's double click on this icon, not the text, because if I click on the text, it'll want me to rename it. So click on the icon, and it will come up with my first web page, which is blank. It might look like this if you're in code view. So here's the first thing we'll talk about. We have 3 different views, actually 4 because there's 2 under live. There's a design view and a live view. Most of the times you're going to be in live view because that will show you what it looks like with your CSS rules applied. All right, but we won't apply any today. Okay, so this is code view, and I already have the basic skeleton of my page. And this is beautiful because it just lets me show you what HTML looks like. So these things in brackets are all HTML elements or tags. And you'll notice that for every one, there's a corresponding closing tag. So this is saying, okay, here's where my HTML begins, here's where my HTML ends at the bottom of the page, right? And there probably won't be very much after that, until later in the semester when we start doing some scripts. Okay, so here's another example. This is the header. That's what shows up in the top of the browser. So for example, this says Untitled Document. I'm going to give this a title just so we can see what happens. This is the body. The body, I'm going to hit a little return so I have some space in there. So notice there's lines. So line 8 is where my body begins right now, and line 10 is where my body ends. Everything I want to put on my web page goes within that body. That is the body of my document. I have to make sure I'm paying super close attention to this. This is, HTML works like on a top-down structure. If it reads that something's supposed to be here like an image, it'll put the image there. If the next corresponding line says I want some text there, then the text will go after the image. So it's like super simple. It just goes through the body, your browser reads from the top, and puts stuff on the page based in its order in HTML. Now, that's the default. Once we start making rules with CSS, we can modify these things a lot. But basically, keep in mind that you always want to pay attention where you are in your HTML when you place something on the page. So let's start with something. Okay, let's go to the next view because this is where I want you working in. The split view, and I'm going to actually, one of the few things you can actually just go ahead and put onto your page is type. So I can go into live view or split view and go up here, and it's I can try typing something, but you'll notice if you're in live view and I try to type in this window, nothing happens. That's what design view is for. Do you have to be in design view if I want to actually like type in here and see my blinking cursor? So I could say my first web page. So exciting, I'm going to put so many exclamations. And notice when I type that here, it shows up down here in my body. Now I could have also, let's go back to my live view. I could have also chosen to, oh, look at that. That was, so you'll also see that each Dreamweaver does some temporary weirdness sometimes. Now, also, first notice there's an indent here, but when I type this, my second line, it's really not my second line. It goes right here because there's no sort of HTML tag that tells it to put a break here. So it's going to read left to right till it runs out of screen space. Like if I collapse this window, you can see it jumps down to the next line. All right, and it does actually become my second line. This is where we're going to be using a lot of CSS, and there's going to be HTML tags that will let us do basic things. Like I could put like a break here. Like I could say insert in HTML, and I could say non-breaking space, and that puts a little space in there. If I want to actually put a break in there, I could say insert HTML, and down here, there's all kinds of things I can pick from. I can say, oh, line break. Now notice it went on to the second line, just because there's this little tag. This is one of the very few tags in HTML, this BR, stands for break, that doesn't need a corresponding end tag. So like everything else has a beginning and an end tag, but the break just puts a line break. So now my second line is actually my second line because I put it after my first line. All right, so these are all HTML elements. There's a lot of them. On Canvas, I have a very important document. It's a PDF for you to download and look at and read and study. It talks about all the basic HTML tags that are super important, like an image tag, the title tag. In fact, let's go ahead and change this one down here. Let's write something else besides untitled document here. But first, let's preview this. All right. Let's just go and show you some of the other stuff on the screen. This is your toolbar. You won't be using that much to begin with. It has, like everything else, it's got help built in, so you can toggle over them and it'll tell you exactly what tool they are. But you'll see that unlike most programs, you won't use the toolbar very often. Down here, there's some more important things. Like for example, there's this thing that shows you the screen size. Now here's the huge difference between this semester and working as a web designer. If you're coming from graphic design, your experience with print, it's going to be hard to leave some of those ideas behind. For example, if someone says you're going to design a book cover, your first question is, well, okay, how big is the book? What size will the cover need to be? And they'll give you very specific parameters for that. Well, your audience as a web designer has all kinds of different browsers, displays. They might be using a phone, they might be using a tablet, they might be using a laptop computer versus an high-density HD monitor. All kinds of different options, and they can take the browser window and resize it however they want. So this gives you like ideas of how your website will look at different sizes. All right, but we'll talk about that later on because that opens up a giant can of worms. But for now, just keep in mind that you're going to have to think differently. That's the important concept for today. All right, the other thing down here is where I was headed is this little preview in browser button. And I'm going to say preview it in Google Chrome. Say save. All right, there we go. There's no formatting whatsoever yet. We're going to need CSS for that. This is my first web page, my second line. I have just HTML in this document so far. We're going to really need to break open style sheets to really start designing things. But also notice this tab up here says Untitled Document. So if I go to bookmark this, like if I go to like add bookmark, the name by default will be Untitled Document. So that's not very helpful. Most people are too lazy to retitle things, or I'm going to give them something to start with. So let's go back to Dreamweaver here for a minute and go back down here to title. And I'm going to call it Jeff's web page. Jeff's assignment web pages. I'll just call it Jeff's assignment. I'll call it Jeff's demo. Now I can put spaces in this and capitals and any kind of special character. It's just the title of my page. It's not my file title. So make a big note of that. This is the page title, not a file title. If it was a file title, it'd have to be lowercase, no spaces, and have an extension. All right, the important thing is I got to preview this. Now notice there's a little asterisk here. That means it's not saved. So if I went to preview it now, it would tell me to save it before it renders correctly. Watch. Save changes, yes, because it needs to go to the disk, and your browser needs to find the document index.html, and oops, what happened there? And load it up. So here's the new version. Here's the old one. There's just demo 1, where actually 2 versions of now. I can close one tab. But notice it's not called Untitled Document anymore. So yay. Let's make one more change to this that we can do in HTML. Let's go ahead and look at some basic things here. There is this insert menu up here that lets you insert basic HTML elements. Those are many of the same things that are in here in the tab, which we'll use primarily. You'll probably notice I don't use these menus too often. But what I could do is, what can I do that's simple? Well, I think we'll just stop there, because really to do anything more advanced, I'm going to have to start breaking into cascading style sheets, and I want to save that for the next demonstration. So the CSS Designer tab we're going to save for the next thing. It is also a super important tab, so just go ahead and leave it open. But we won't take a look at that just today. Okay. I hope that gives you a pretty good introduction to Dreamweaver and what HTML looks like. It's very specific in terms of how you write HTML. Everything has brackets, and these tags are defined by a consortium that updates different tags and adds different tags as HTML develops and people ask for new things. But some of these things have been around since day 1. And also there's a video on Canvas about the development of the web and how it all came about, which is kind of fun to watch, and please watch it. Okay, thank you for your attention in this matter. I will leave you with the Photoshop document one last time, and all the summary of what the important elements of today were.